I would like to welcome everyone. I'm Nora Dudwick. I'm board president of xMinds, the organization hosting tonight's event on secondary school placements. We do have another meeting now running as well on preschool placements. If that's a session you wanted to attend, you can switch now. The link is in our chat. First of all, for the Spanish speakers in the audience, Carolina Harp will give you instructions for finding the Spanish audio channel. Go ahead, Carolina.
Muy buenas noches. Si hablan español y le gustaría escuchar esta parte del evento en español, haga clic en el icono que dice interpretación en la barra de herramientas en la parte de abajo de su pantalla y seleccione el idioma español para poder escuchar la traducción. Gracias. Bienvenidos.
Thanks, Carolina. We only have 2 hours to cover a lot of information, so I'll try to keep my introduction not too long. What we want to bring you today is a thorough and clear review of all the services and programs that MCPS offers to middle and high school students on the spectrum. Our speakers are all MCPS staff who know these programs intimately. We're very grateful to them for taking the time to prepare their presentations and for being here tonight to share what they know and to answer your questions. Just as there is a wide range in the support needs of students who are autistic, there is a correspondingly wide range of programs that MCPS offers to support these kids. The first 4 presentations will cover programs leading to diplomas, and these are the Learning and Academic Disabilities, LAD or LAD, Asperger Connections, Autism Resource Services, and Bridge. And the second set will cover the certificate programs, Learning for Independence, School Community-Based Program, the Autism Program, and Extensions. These programs are arranged roughly in order from those providing the least support to those providing the most support, although please remember that in practice, there is overlap among these programs. We will try to minimize jargon because we really want everything to be understandable. If you hear something you don't understand, a term or an acronym, please ask for clarification in the chat. I know we have a lot of parents here who are new to special education, and they might not be yet used to the specialized terms that are used. We have volunteers and MCPS staff ready to clarify anything you don't understand by typing in the chat. In fact, I'd like to mention also that there are several important members of the MCPS Office of Special Education who may be joining us for part of the time tonight to support their staff. These include Diana Wiles, Acting Associate Superintendent, Office of Special Education, Chris Sikan, Supervisor of Services for Students with Autism Spectrum Disorders, and Amy Kropp, Director, Division of Pre-Kindergarten Special Programs and Related Services. And they may be coming in and out. We will have 2 breaks in the presentation for questions, one in the middle and one at the end. Please write your questions for the presenters in the chat at any time, and our facilitators will read them out to the presenters when we get to the next Q&A break. Keep in mind that some of the questions may be answered directly in the chat. Also, I'd like to give you a little guidance on your questions. Remember, the presenters tonight know all about the programs they run, but they don't know your child. So the questions they can answer are questions about the programs, but they won't be able to answer questions about where your child would fit best. However, you have come to the right place to learn about the various placement options. MCPS and xMinds have partnered to provide you with all the essential information about the programs so that armed with that information, you'll be better equipped to assess where your child might be best served. We've asked the speakers tonight to provide detailed descriptions of each program and to highlight key differences between them, and also to provide you with a level of detail that is not available on the MCPS website. Please keep in mind that the specifics of any program may vary from school to school and for different students. So we did ask ahead of time for the presenters to tell us, give us an idea of the general profile of students who would thrive in a particular program, what parts of the day the students would be in self-contained classes versus supported or co-taught classes in the general education setting, where students will spend lunch and recess. For programs where not all the children are autistic, to what extent will best practices for students with autism be used? How does the program support the development of social skills and executive functioning skills? What is the ratio between staff and students in self-contained settings? In practice, we understand that this varies a great deal, particularly given current staff shortages. And for LAD and homeschool model, where students remain in the general education setting, what supports are commonly provided to autistic students? And what are the supports that cannot be provided in that setting? Ultimately, where your child is placed is a decision made by the IEP team, but do remember that you as parents are important members of this team. And the more you know about your child's placement options, the better an advocate you can be for your child when it comes to these decisions. Finally, a few housekeeping issues. I want to mention we're recording the session in both English and Spanish. We will make the recordings and presentation slides available to you in a few days. Our first speaker, actually speakers, are Cynthia Webb and Laura Johnson, who are area supervisors in the Department of Special Education Services. They'll talk about the Learning and Academic Disabilities program. Cynthia and Laura, thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to you right now.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Cynthia Webb. I am an area special education supervisor, and I support the Bethesda Chevy Chase, Blair, Einstein, and Northwood clusters.
Good evening. My name is Laura Johnson, and I am also an area supervisor with the Department of Special Education. I support the Gaithersburg, Northwest, Poolsville, and Springbrook clusters. I see that somebody was gracious enough in the chat to put the link to our document that explains which supervisors oversee all of the different areas. So thank you for that.
We are talking about learning and academic disability services, also called LAD or LAD. As was shared with you, once a student once the IE team meets, they will discuss the services that a student needs in general ed or out of general ed. Based on the level of service determined by the IEP team, we can then begin to discuss where those services are going to be provided. So the first thing that everyone should be aware of is that learning and academic disability services are available in all secondary schools in Montgomery County. This includes our middle schools and our high schools. In this set of services, the students spend the majority of their day with their non-disabled peers in both academics and in elective courses. Classroom instruction is going to be provided by a variety of staff members, including general education teachers, special education teachers, and paraeducators. One thing that everyone should know is that in our middle schools, most schools have lunches assigned by grade level, and students are directed into the school cafeteria and some minimal other areas. So for example, students may be able to go outside during lunch. Lunch in the middle school is about 30 minutes long. In the high school, the lunch period is a lot less structured. Most high schools have lunch where students can go to any area of the building to have lunch. They are not assigned in any way. They meet up with their peer group. They could have lunch in a classroom with a teacher. They could have lunch outside. They could have lunch in the hallway. They could have lunch in the cafeteria. Some of our schools, depending on the schools, also allow students to go off campus for lunch. In LAD, we serve all students, including those with all of the disabilities and with autism spectrum disorders. Laura, would you like to pick up?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Webb. As Dr. Webb was explaining, supports in LAD services do include supports for a variety of different disabilities, and those supports are found inside and outside of the general education setting. In LAD services, we typically see those supports inside the general education setting through a combination of individuals, including special education teachers and special education paraeducators for the core content classes. So math, English, science, and social studies. The students are included with their general education peers in PE and health in the middle school and electives. And at high school, there's a variety of different electives and wonderful courses that students can take. One of the main differences between elementary school and secondary schools is the addition of a resource class. Resource is a dedicated period that happens every day as a part of the 7-day period in most of our middle and high school programs, where students can have the opportunity to work with a special education teacher or other individuals on specific items related to their IEP goals and objectives. It's an opportunity for students to receive extended time on assignments, additional front loading of work, and then also really key to our students, particularly in middle school, is those executive functioning and organization strategies. If we think about our services for middle school, they're all designed to prepare students to be as independent as possible once they get to high school. And then in high school, we're preparing them for life after high school. Students in the LAB program are also eligible to receive any related services that are on their IEP. Next, one more slide, please, including speech and language services. Additionally, as outlined in their IEP, our LAD service students also receive their supplementary aids and services and accommodations outlined by their IEP to support communication, executive functioning, some behavior challenge, self-advocacy, all of the different parts of the IEP. And as in an effort to make students more independent, we do employ both low-tech and high-tech assistive technology strategies to support that level of independence. Our next presenter will be Ms. Robin Daisy, and she will be presenting on the Asperger Connections program.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, my name is Robin Daisy. I'm an instructional specialist with the Autism Office, and I'll be talking today about our Asperger's program, which will be transitioning to a new name officially July 1st of this year. It will become Autism Connection Services. So during this transition, we are awkwardly referring to it by various names, Asperger's, Asperger's/Connections, but it is all the same set of services that we are talking about. And again, as of July 1, it will just be Connections. So the student, I want to talk a little bit about the students that we serve in Autism Connection Services. Again, Asperger's for now. So our students are at the middle and high school level, but this is true for our students at the elementary level as well. The students access general education curriculum on or above grade level academically. For most of our students, they are very strong in reading and in math specifically. Sometimes they're among the strongest in the school, but where our students sometimes do struggle academically is in written language production. They tend to have really good ideas about what they want to write, but due to their challenges with executive functioning, they really struggle to get that information onto paper or onto a document, even using the computer without some specialized instruction to address those needs. Most of our students are motivated to perform academically, but they really need additional support to support, again, those executive functioning skills, beginning tasks, organizing tasks, sustaining those tasks, and then also sometimes their struggles around cognitive inflexibility can create challenges for them in the curriculum as well. In terms of verbal skills, for both expressive and receptive language, so their ability to explain what they have to say, whether we're talking about socially or academically, is typically above average for our students, and the same is true for their ability to understand language. Where they sometimes struggle and do require some of those related services that Ms. Johnson was talking about is in social or pragmatic language. So they might have difficulty figuring out how to, for example, ask a teacher for help. And most of our students do have a desire to develop social relationships, but they tend to struggle to find friends among their age group peers. Their interests tend to be sometimes a little different than is common for neurotypical students. So our neurodivergent learners, we do see that they struggle socially with their grade level peers, and do tend to make more friends among the other students in the program. It's not to say they don't also make friends in the general education programming, but globally speaking, I think our students tend to find friends among the peers in the program who have similar strengths and needs and interests. We can go ahead to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about the services. So I'm going to talk about both middle and high school, which have some overlaps, but there are definitely distinctions between the two sets of services. So at the middle school level, our schools happen to both be in buildings that have a 7-period day. So the students start in first period every day and end in 7th period. Among those 7 periods, they need to take the 4 core academics: English, math, science, and social studies. And then they need to also take PE, which 1/4 of the year they're in health. For the other 2 periods, most middle schoolers would have classes that are a choice, what we call elective classes. For many of our students, because of their specialized need for social skill instruction and to support the executive functioning, they do not have room in their schedule for the electives, because instead they take a social skills class, which is where they start their day, and a resource class at the end of the day. Those are both smaller special education classes taught by one of the Connections teachers. The other class where we have the capacity to provide that smaller self-contained setting is for the English class. And that's true for English 6, 7, or 8. They are taught using the advanced English 6, 7, or 8 curriculum. I know there was a question about staff to student ratio. Again, there's definitely a range, but typically speaking, it's taught by a special education teacher. Depending on the class size, there is often a paraeducator, but usually we're in the 6 to 10 range. If we have that 6 to 10 students, we definitely have a paraeducator supporting the class. Sometimes, because each class is specific to a grade level, we might have a uniquely small grade level that doesn't require a paraeducator to support the class. The other parts of the day are in general education with special education support if students need it, which many of our students do. So the students would have special education support in the other academic classes, that's math, science, and social studies, as well as PE. If students are recommended or should be accessing accelerated or enriched classes, those classes can also be supported by special education staff. At the high school, we shift a little bit more. Most of our students have come through our set of services and really developed their social skills, developed their writing skills, and what we see tends to be the biggest challenge for our high schoolers is the executive functioning set of skills that really impact our students in accessing the workload, managing the high school workload, managing all of the different organizational components required of the high school day. So most of our students take again, a self-contained resource class. That's a smaller special education class taught by one of the Connections teachers. Outside of general education, either 1 or 2 periods per day. And that class would support both executive functioning, provide some opportunity for social problem solving, helping students, for example, plan how am I going to ask for a retake, go seek out a teacher for additional help, even down to things as minute as how do I go buy homecoming tickets? Those are the kinds of skills that they might be working on, but more on an individual level, so not whole group instruction on those kinds of skills. For the remainder of the day, the students are in general education. If they need support in the core academic classes, including the honors level classes, for English, math, science, and social studies, that is available across the 4 grade levels. And our next speaker will be Claire Lanham, also from our office, talking about Autism Resource Services.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Claire Lanham, and I'm a program specialist in the Autism unit. Nice to see you all today. And I'm going to be talking about Autism Resource Services. Next slide, please. Autism Resource Services is a grade 6 through 12 only program. So that's a common question that we get asked about if there are elementary versions of these services. And the answer is no. So this program really begins at the grade 6 level. So I'll be talking about middle and high school Autism Resource Services tonight. Just like my colleague Robin was discussing, I'm first going to talk about the student characteristics of the students we serve within Autism Resource Services. Students in our program are able to access the general education curriculum. However, they typically independently function about 2 to 3 years below grade level, especially in those core academic skills of reading, writing, and math. Often with our students, we see that they may have stronger basic skills, or what we sometimes refer to as rote skills. So on an IEP, that might be their math calculation or their reading phonics. But in terms of those application skills of problem solving or comprehension, that's where our students tend to maybe not be quite at grade level independently. And so they require some direct instruction and direct supports in those areas. Because of these needs, our students require a modified pace of instruction. While they are able to access the general education curriculum that their, general education counterparts are learning, they might need that content to be slowed down. And again, that pace of instruction to be adjusted for their needs and in order to embed some of those scaffolds and supports. Within our classes, we are doing pre-teaching and reteaching of that academic content, front loading when needed to help our students engage meaningfully with that content. Our students also require individual accommodations, based on their IEPs and because of those significant academic needs in some of those areas. Our students do have needs and delays in their expressive and their receptive language, as well as needs in social pragmatic language. So our students tend to have difficulty with language. Academic language can be difficult for them when it comes to that general education curriculum in the secondary setting, with that academic vocabulary and that rigor. And so they do tend to have direct speech and language services, and then some collaboration among the teachers and the related service providers. Our students, in terms of their social needs, tend to be socially naive. Oftentimes, our students may have very intense special interests or preferred topics that might be not what a typical 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th through 12th grader might be interested in. And our students can be very, very interested in those topics. And sometimes that can cause them to have difficulty socializing with their peers. Some of our students more than others. Our students, because of these needs, do struggle to engage with their peers appropriately, begin conversations, join in school activities, and might need support in those areas. And this can be due to their language needs that I noted, and also just due to a lack of social understanding or ability to navigate those social environments without instruction and support. Next, thank you. So in terms of how we support these students with those needs within our programs, I'm going to talk a little bit about the middle school services and then again how that looks at the high school level. So for our middle school students, grades 6, 7, and 8, we are able to offer instruction outside of the general education setting. So we often also refer to that as a self-contained setting. So that would be a course taught by a special education teacher within our program. And all of the students in that class would have an IEP and be in our Autism Resource Services program. So we offer that instruction in English, reading, math, and resource. The English and math class are going to be the grade level class that a general education student would take. So English 6, English 7, English 8, same for math. And then the reading class is an intervention class. So that is a class where we're really working on those direct reading skills, and the intervention would be chosen based on the student's specific needs. Resource, within our resource class in Autism Resource Services, we're teaching direct social skills instruction and supporting our students' executive functioning needs. When they are not in the self-contained or special education environment, our students are in the general education setting with some support. That support could be provided by a special education teacher or a special education paraeducator, and that would be for their other classes. This could be their science, social studies, their electives, as well as PE and health. And we do have the ability, based on student needs, to support those settings as the student schedule indicates. When we get to high school, the service model is very similar in high school. However, the time spent within the special education setting and within general education setting can change a little bit as our students develop as they get older. So we do offer instruction, again, outside of the general education setting. That's that self-contained special education setting for that reading intervention, resource, and then academic classes. And this can depend on the student's needs, how rigorous each course is at the high school level, and just based on our cohorts of students. And so every year it is a little bit different in terms of which classes we are choosing to offer in the self-contained environment versus a co-taught or a supported class. Then whenever our students are not within the self-contained environment, they are out in the general education setting, again, with that same support mentioned at the middle school level, which could be a special education teacher co-teaching the course or a special education paraeducator providing support. And those staff are providing that academic instruction, that academic scaffolds and supports, but also providing in the moment social skills feedback to our students to try to tie in that direct social skills instruction that's happening in the resource class to those in the moment happenings that can occur for our student as they're engaging with their secondary learning environments. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, Dr. Sandy Ives and Ms. Heather Strauss, to speak about bridge services.
Thank you, Claire. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sandy Ives, and I'm supervisor of social emotional special education services, and Bridge falls under that umbrella. Next slide, please. I'm going to start with the student characteristics, and then we'll move into the service highlights. So our students are cognitively and academically average to above average and are accessing the general education curriculum on or above grade level in all academic subjects. Students in our programs may be challenged by social vulnerability, problem solving and perspective taking, abstract thinking, interpreting social cues, establishing and maintaining relationships with peers, group and collaborative learning, coping with anxiety, school stressors, emotional regulation, changes in routine and transitioning, sensory sensitivity, pragmatic language, and executive functioning skills. Next slide, please.
Hi, I'm Heather Strauss. It's good to be with everyone tonight. I'm going to talk about the services at the middle school and high school level and what it looks like. I'm going to start with the middle school. At the middle school level, we can provide all core academic areas, so math, science, history, English. Outside of general education, we also can provide PE and some of the electives outside of general education. And there's a daily resource class. Our resource classes at the middle school level address social skills instruction, as well as executive functioning and work completion. We're really working on having students learn how to self-advocate, how to prioritize assignments, and also learn social skills regarding making and keeping friends, as well as working collaboratively with their peers, working in a group situation, and perspective taking. Students do have access to general education classes, and it can be supported by a paraeducator or by in a co-taught environment, as in both electives as well as the content areas. One of the major differences with bridge services is we do offer group counseling services by a social worker to give students an opportunity to rehearse social skills and work on self-advocacy and perspective taking, so that then they can generalize those skills in general education settings. In regards to lunch, students in bridge services can eat lunch in the cafeteria. They also can go to other areas that may be open throughout the building. And then the area in the school where the bridge classrooms are and services, there is open rooms for them to eat there, so that they don't have, many of our students get overwhelmed in the lunchroom setting, and so they do have a smaller environment for that. In the high school, things shift a little. We do offer instruction for those core academic subjects, so math, history, science, and English outside of the general education setting. We also offer a PE class. Students in high school only need to take 1 year of PE, as well as health for a year. And we also offer a resource class. Due to the wide range of electives that are offered and completers that are needed for the high school, those are done in general education settings, and if needed, a support of a paraeducator can be given. Also, students can access the content areas in general education as deemed appropriate by the IEP team. Just like in our middle schools, we do offer group counseling services provided by our social worker that work on social skills, self-advocacy as well, and perspective taking at the high school level.
Thank you, Heather. May I just add one more thing, Ms. Secan, before we go on? I've seen a lot of questions asking about locations. I just wanted to say our bridge programs are located at Hoover Middle School, Gaithersburg Middle School, Briggs Cheney Middle School, Churchill High School, Gaithersburg High School, and Paint Branch High School. Thank you.
And we do have time for Q&A. If you have posed questions, please do look in the chat, because some of them have been answered, but a number of them have not. So Daria, would you like to read out some of the questions?
Yes, sure. And shout out to all of our experts on the call. The rapid fire response has been great. I've tried to do my best to track some of the unanswered questions. There are not many, and forgive me if these have been asked and answered, but I'll just throw them out real quick. What is the approach for the Connections program? Is it ABA based?
Chris, do you want to answer that, or you want me to?
You can go ahead. I was trying to type, but I will join you if you feel the need.
Okay. So in terms of the instruction, when we're talking about social skills instruction, it's the principles of ABA are included in the way that we approach student behavior, in the way that we approach social skills instruction, but it is not a strictly ABA program. So again, the ABA principles are applied. In terms of what we do for social skills instruction, because I feel like that's a natural follow-up question, is the answer is that we use a variety of different commercial curricula, as well as teacher-made lessons and materials that the classes follow. And that's true for both Connections, as well as, I'll speak for my colleague, Ms. Lanham, for Autism Resource Services as well.
Great. Another question. How is the process in place to coach and assess kids to accept our kids? Like what happens in the classroom to help, I guess, neurotypical kids to better understand kids on the spectrum?
I think I'll start to take that and ask Ms. Lanham and Ms. Daisy to join me in talking about ARS and our Connections program in particular. So we touched on it briefly, and it's beyond the scope of our meeting tonight, but all of the services that were mentioned tonight intervene either very directly or in a less direct manner around students' social skills. And some of the social skills continuums that we use have been created from materials and social skills supports that were created by others, and some created within the context of our program. Part of social skills beginning at the elementary level obviously has to do with being around peers and what's expected and what's unexpected and how to deal with social challenges. So I wonder if Ms. Daisy and Ms. Lanham would share a sentence or two about specific supports in ARS and Connections, and any of our other speakers add to that.
So I can answer for, well, really for Connections and for ARS. In terms of supporting our students' social skill needs in the general education setting, or really all throughout the middle school or high school day, we would have staff support available when students need it. And really that's an individualized IEP decision that helps guide our discussions around what a student needs, both for services and for supplementary aids and services on the IEP. But where we know that our students need that help, and again, it's different for different students, we would have adults available to be able to kind of coach in the moment and or problem solve before or after, depending on, again, the student's strengths and needs and language capacity for processing a particular social interaction.
Got it. Thank you. There's a few more questions popping up. A really quick question is there a bridge program at Sherwood High School?
No, there's not a bridge program at Sherwood High School. Dr. Ives, did you want to expand on what is offered at Sherwood?
Sherwood doesn't have a bridge program, but the three high schools that do are Churchill, Gaithersburg High School, and Paint Branch. And depending on the home elementary school of the student would determine which school the student would articulate to.
Great, thank you. Is there a particular program that's better suited for 2E students?
I'm just going to hop in here and say, again, as xMinds so eloquently expressed at the beginning of our presentation, the individual strengths and needs of all of our students really have to be considered around the different offerings of the respective programs, where they're located, access to the neighborhood school. And so I really think that starts to be an individual question. One of the things that I would like to share tonight is that we have approximately 2,700 students in autism in MCPS with a primary diagnostic code of autism. And the students literally are distributed all across services and homeschools in the county, all the way from full inclusion in a home school with a minor IEP to students who are served in non-public settings. And so it sounds evasive when we start to say we can't answer where someone is better served, but truly that is an individual discussion to have with your IEP team.
Are there any plans to add an ARS or bridge or other program up county?
I'll let Dr. Ives talk about bridge, but we know that we are continuing to expand all our services all across the county. We seem gradually to be working our way northward in ARS.
So at this time, bridge services are adequately meeting the needs across our system for students that need that set of services. We started with only one set of bridge programs at Churchill and Hoover, and we have grown to 6 at this point. So we are able to provide a lot of support for students.
Daria, I'd like to break in for 1 second.
Sure.
Chris told me that Philip Lynch has made some time to join our session. Philip Lynch is the Director, Department of Special Education Services, and he had a few comments he wanted to share with us.
Hi,
Philip?
good evening, folks. Yes, this is Philip Lynch, Director for the Department of Special Education Services. Thank you all for having our team here this evening and for being so welcoming. And thank you to all the MCPS staff members for sharing information. I can answer one of the questions I see in the chat, and then I'll make a quick announcement and put some information in the chat as well based on that will support my announcement. But I'm going to reiterate what Chris shared, which is that, you know, students on the autism spectrum are served all across our different continuum of services. I see questions that are asking about the difference between different types of services, and sometimes that can be defined by what the primary role of the case manager or what the special education service delivery model looks like for those students. But I will say for both, and I see the question about GTLD or what we've changed the name, just like we changed the name of the Asperger's Connection program. GTLD, for those you don't know now, are twice exceptional services now. That is the official name. So we no longer just use that term GTLD. But I will say that the primary service delivery model for students at the secondary level for those services is an inclusion model with that includes a case manager with typically a resource classroom that specifically serves the needs for those different groups of students. There are different characteristics of those students that may come through in terms of what their needs are. And so those resource classes would be specifically designed to address the needs of those students, whether it be for social skills in one program, such as the Asperger's Connection program, where it's going to be maybe helping students work through some challenges associated with with their everyday interactions with other students or in their community. And with the GTLD services or the twice exceptional services, it may be specific to learning disabilities that we see across their needs as they are supported in their general education settings. So those are service delivery models that are primarily supporting students in the general education setting, with some time set aside throughout the course of the school day to meet their individual specific needs. So that's, I think, the best way to answer that question. They're similar in terms of the design, but they are set up to meet the specific needs of those students. And a student with on the autism spectrum could be served in either one of those settings. The announcement I have is that it's just a little plug for our special education Citizens Advisory Committee, CCAC. Many of you know about CCAC, but some of you may not. And that is a organization that every LEA or school district is required to have. We are required to share information with parents on a regular basis. Through that forum, we have an executive group that is made up of parent co-chairs, of which there are 3 currently. And we meet once a month on Thursday evenings. There are a couple months where there's exceptions based on holiday and based on one month where we have the superintendent come in and we have to be flexible for her schedule. So I'm going to put into the chat the link to the CCAC webpage, which will give you all the information, including our parent co-chairs, for whom you're also welcome to speak with if you have questions, or if you'd like to make public comment, which is a part of our standing agenda, where parents can comment about concerns or celebrations that they would like to share with their community. So I'll put that information in the chat, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to answer a question and to thank our staff for being here and to introduce myself. Thanks.
Philip, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. That was really informative. I think we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, which is nice. How about we have a couple more Q&A, a couple more questions and answers, and then we'll move to our second session. Daria, do you have a couple questions?
Yep, that sounds good. Here are a few more. Are kids in the Bridge program able to take electives?
I can get that, Dr. Oz, unless you want to. Students in Bridge services can take electives.
Great. And then a clarifying point to one of the earlier questions, and forgive me if I didn't ask it correctly. I think the question is, if you have a child that's in a mixed setting, how is the program helping to bring along those neurotypical kids that are in that setting with kids on the spectrum? I want to make sure that we did answer that question.
So I misunderstood that question. Depending on the school, the needs, and resources available, most schools, primarily elementary schools, but we can move into middle and high schools, are able to offer some type of support and awareness to gen ed peers regarding supporting their peers on the autism spectrum. That again is an individual decision that's made around school culture, and whether or not the student and his or her family and the staff surrounding that group see a need or see that it is appropriate to do that type of awareness. Particularly at middle and high school, that can be stigmatizing and is not always necessary. Sometimes individual kids need some individual support and education that can be provided by counselors, by case managers, etc.
Thank you. Are there any BCBAs with up-to-date certification who support these programs?
Yes, there are, although that is not a requirement or a job category recognition in the school system at this time.
And I think you all answered part of this question. I just want to make sure that it's clear. Can you speak to the behavioral needs of the GTLD program? Is there a certain profile for 2E services?
I wonder if someone who is
I can
more
speak.
familiar.
I can speak to that. So again, we're referring to those as twice exceptional services. And I'll keep saying that till we all get used to it. But the answer is no, there isn't a specific profile, but we do look for students who would be meet that kind of gifted criteria. Typically that includes a review of the students' assessment data. That could include standardized assessment data, normed assessment data, school-based assessment information, school-based performance information. But that's so the student would have some sense of giftedness in terms of their performance. That can look different depending on the student. So there isn't any one specific criteria on that front. But at the same time, the student would meet the criteria for disability. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a specific learning disability, which is one of the reasons why the name of the program has evolved. GTLD is by name is confined to students with learning disabilities, but we do serve students who have other who meet the criteria for other disability categories, such as students with other health impairment or intentional needs. So there is a range of students that may be served in those under that definition, but you would need to have those two pieces. Of course, the eligibility for a disability in that and that gifted profile. So that's typically what we're looking for. We do serve just like GTL, just like our autism services. We serve students with that profile all across MCPS in different settings. It does not mean that students would need to be removed from their home school. We have consult services. We work with our schools to determine how to best serve students with those types of profiles. So it wouldn't necessarily mean that the student would need to be removed from their homeschool setting in order to receive those types of supports. It could also be, those students could also be supported through our LAD services that were described earlier. But there are, we do have specific schools and programs for students when we feel like students do require that unique set of services.
Great, thank you. And we have one more question before we pivot to the second part of the presentation. To visit the different programs at schools, how can one do that? How can families do that?
We shared earlier in the chat a list of the area and program supervisors. And I think that if you're interested in seeing a school that we've discussed as being available in a neighborhood school or an area, that you could email the supervisor or their supporting team members. If you're interested in visiting an autism specific program such as ARS or our Connections program or some of the programs that our team members will talk about later, you can call the autism office and ask if there are tours scheduled. We'll put the number for that in the chat. We would advise you, though, to think about visiting schools in conjunction with the school team that supports your student currently, so that we have a sense of whether or not that program is an option for your child, or they're being well served where they are, or whether there are other considerations for your child.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. I think let's move on to the second set of presentations, and keep in mind that at the end we'll have another Q&A, and if there are questions that come up for you about the first section, you can pose those questions as well. So we'll move to Anne-Marie Tagliaferri, who is Supervisor, Alternate Learning Outcome Services. Okay, Anne-Marie, over to you finally.
Wonderful, thank you. So yes, my name is Anne-Marie Tagliaferri, and I supervise 3 of our alternate learning outcome services or indoor programs. That includes our school community-based Learning for Independence and extensions. I know we don't want to get into acronyms, but you may have heard that ALO term before, and I wanted to explain that a bit before we moved forward. Next slide. So when you hear the term alternate learning outcomes or ALO, we're talking about our alternate standards, achievement standards, which I'll show you on the next slide. But in this case, students are accessing, like I said, the alternate achievement standards or alternate learning outcomes is another term you may hear. And the students are found eligible through the Appendix A, which is part of the IEP process. Students in these services are focusing on the most essential pieces of the curriculum, and I'll give you an example of that on the next slide. Skills are taught in context with opportunities for repeated instruction in both large and small groups. I'll explain a bit more of that specifically as we get into the specific programs. And all of the programs I work with also have a community-based instruction component to support the generalization of skills. So this is an example, and I apologize, it is a grade 3. I have a grade 9-10 English language arts example that I will drop into the chat when I'm finished that you can refer to, but the principle will stay the same. The alternate achievement standards is not an alternate curriculum. Our students are accessing the general education curriculum, but they're accessing those most important pieces. And this, while I said an example from grade 3, you can see on the one column, those are the Common Core state standards. And on the second column, the essential elements. And the essential elements are really the pieces that our teachers are pulling from to do their lesson planning and their curriculum and assessment. I can share, in case somebody is not able to look onto the screen if they're on their phone, I'll just share one of these examples. So if the Common Core state standard is to ask and answer questions to demonstrate understanding of a text, referring explicitly to the text as the basis for answers, the essential element, or that piece that we would look at in our alternate standards, would be answer who and what questions to demonstrate understanding of text. So again, pulling out those most important pieces of that standard. Next slide. So we're going to talk, or I'm going to talk from our more restrictive to our less restrictive programming. The first is our Learning for Independence, often referred to as LFI. And I set up this chart and I will expand a bit on some of these bullet points. If you have any additional questions, like we said, please put into the chat. Some of my colleagues are also here that may be able to answer. A typical class has one teacher, one paraeducator, and 10 to 12 students. As you know, that is variable and will look different school to school, but that is our general principle we abide by. The instructional setting for our secondary students is self-contained special education instruction in all their core content areas. So English, language arts, math, science, social studies. And in our secondary, middle and high, they are also able to choose electives. It depends often on the school's master schedule about the number of, either we have some self-contained electives for just our students that are in LFI, and then they also are able to access the electives that are available to the entire school population. Like I said, I use the term specials here. I'm thinking elementary, but really I'm referring to electives in which they're able to access with their peers. As I stated before, in this instructional setting, they're accessing those alternate achievement standards. It's both whole and small group instruction. In our secondary programs, their schedules look fairly typical to a regular middle or high school. They're changing classes, with different teachers for those core content areas. Unlike the next program I'll talk about, SCB, these students in which the students are self-contained the entire day, these students are moving around the building, usually with the direct supervision of a teacher or a paraeducator, but they are often able to do so independently. The instructional style is a more naturalistic teaching style. The students are taught in context. And while there are certainly some of those basic principles of applied behavior analysis in looking at, the functional relationship between the responses or the behaviors and the environment, it's often approached more holistically, maybe in a larger group with supports that may be unifying for all of the students. So they may do more group contingencies in their classrooms. They, for their behavior or for their, completion of work. But they also are certainly accessing the prompt hierarchy, lots of visual supports, and other, behavior contracts, first then token economies, and students may or may not, have a behavior intervention plan individual as needed. This, like I said, all of the students are accessing the community-based instruction. So in middle school and high school, the students are participating 2 times a week. And so they're really taking what they've learned in the classroom and applying those skills in their surrounding community. They first work on them in their classroom community, then their school community, and then, expand on that. That may be through, going to, a local Target or, the recycling center may be an elementary, example that I share, but they're using the resources that are available to them in their community, and that we want them to be able to access as independently as possible. Our high school students also participate in on-the-job training. So this typically starts a little bit later in high school. Most of the time, our students stay with us until they're 21 years old, and they participate in both on-school job sites and off-school job sites. We have students that run school stores within their middle and high schools. We have lots of businesses, in our schools as well. We have a wonderful soap making company, lots of cookie and popcorn and other snack businesses. And so again, they're taking those skills that they're learning in their English language arts and their math, and they're applying them in their community. We also have students that are accessing job sites that are off-site, and there's a very wide range of opportunities, from nursing home rehabilitation centers to CVS, Planet Fitness, Marriott, Topgolf. We have many wonderful community partners. And if you do have questions specific to those, I would encourage you to talk to your child's transition support teacher. So, the characteristics of our students that are accessing our secondary LFI, we do have a variety of disabilities of students that we're serving, certainly not only autism, but most of the students, some general shared characteristics is that they're going to have a fairly reliable communication system. We know that looks different for every student. We have many students accessing various types of communication methods, but typically they do have one that's fairly reliable. Often we also, especially in our secondary, we're seeing some more consistent response methods. So we are, the students are able to access their instruction in that larger group, and the teacher is also able to assess them in that larger group. And like I said, that group could be anywhere, from 4 to 5 students in a group, up to 10 to 12. The students are typically fairly independent in most of their classroom routines and also in most of their adaptive routines. That's not exclusionary. We certainly have students that have some, that have adaptive needs that are also being served in our Learning for Independence program. All right, next slide. And, at risk of being too repetitive, I'm going to try to, be brief in some of the areas that are fairly similar. But our school community-based program, the staffing ratio is a bit smaller or higher. We had this, debate the other day. We have 1 student, 2 paraeducators, and typically around 6 to 8 students. One of the main differences in these services, if you look at them compared to Learning for Independence, is that the students are going to make many less transitions throughout their day. They're going to be in their self-contained special education instruction for all of their core content areas, often with the same teacher. Now, it's not unheard of in our secondary schools to have that departmentalized, but we do look to minimize the transitions for students throughout the day. So they may have 2 to 3 periods in a row in the same room and or with the same teacher. The students are also accessing their electives, typically as a class cohort, though it is certainly an individual IEP team decision. We have students that are also accessing electives that are outside of that cohort based on student interest and or need. And again, we are looking at more that in-context learning. So the teachers do have that more naturalistic teaching style in which they're, presenting a topic or a skill, and that, I do, we do, you do, with those supports that I had shared in Learning for Independence as well. Visuals, first, then breaking down into much smaller units, reinforcement throughout the lesson for attending, responding. The students are accessing, I would say, certain skills for maybe a longer period of time. There's more opportunity for repetition, and they are typically accessing it at a bit of a slower pace. In terms of community-based instruction, it's going to look very similar to our Learning for Independence. They're participating 2 times per week. Those students are also participating in those on and off school job sites after their 9th grade year. And some, characteristics that many of our students share is that they may have a bit more of an emerging communication system. And so the school teams are really focusing on making sure that we do have very strong ways that we are able to, communicate with our students and also understand what their response is, so that we're able to get really good data and information on, where their strengths and their needs lie. They may need, though, more direct instruction to master that response method. It may not be enough to do that in a group of, 3 or 4 students, or even up to that 6 to 8. The teacher and or the paraeducators may have to, work more directly and or in a much smaller group of maybe 2 students to work on that response method. And it's very often or common, in our programs that the students need support to participate in all of their classroom routines and often in some of their adaptive and their self-care routines. And they, to differentiate that a little bit also between LFI is that they're also going to need very direct instruction to learn those skills and be able to maintain them. And I will be speaking again in just a few moments about extensions, but for now, I'm going to pass it along to Dominic Faby and Mark Custer.
Hi, I'm Mark Custer. I'm a program specialist with our autism unit, supporting several of our middle and high school sites.
Good evening. I'm Dominic Faby, an instructional specialist, also supporting some of our middle and high school programs.
So, we have the name Autism program, but if we've learned anything tonight, it's that students with autism are served in a wide range of services. So placement in our program would be kind of driven by student need, not necessarily solely based on their diagnosis. Students in our program generally have significant needs in 3 areas: adaptive skills, behaviors, and communication. Some of the adaptive skills that our students need direct instruction on include their self-care skills, self-direction, social skills, recreation and leisure skills, household skills, functional academic skills, community access, job skills, and their health and safety skills. Students in our program often do present with a range of challenging behaviors as well. And those, again, like everything else, range. From things like self-simulatory behaviors, needs in the area of socially appropriate behavior, up through more serious issues like self-injury or aggression. And finally, our students typically have significant needs in the area of communication. We do spend a good amount of our day working on the ability to express basic wants and needs, as well as working our students towards self-advocacy, as well as social communication skills. And again, those goals would be designed based on the individual student needs. Like the other 2 programs that Ms. Tagliaferri mentioned, our students do access alternate learning outcomes and pursue a certificate of program completion. Most of them are likely to stay in high school until age 21. And at which point most of them articulate to adult day programs for lifelong supports. Next slide, please. Again, to acquire those functional skills, which I mentioned earlier, most of our students do need direct and repeated instruction over a period of time to learn those skills. So, by definition, we require a very highly modified pace, as well as a systematic approach to instruction, incorporating a wide range of individual accommodations. I'll turn it over to Mr. Faby.
So we can go to the next slide. So students who are in our program do have a focus on those functional academic skills to build up independence. So we do have a focus on those functional academic skills, as I shared, in the areas of reading, math, and written language. Students are accessing this mostly in a self-contained setting, along with other instruction in the areas of adapted living skills. As Mr. Custer shared, we're also focusing on that community-based instruction as well as functional living skills. In our classes, the typical setup for this would be supported by 1 classroom teacher, typically 2 paraeducators with about 6 students in the classroom. If you were to walk in one of our classes, you would see instruction sometimes in a small group setting, sometimes in a large group setting, depending on the type of activity students are accessing at a given time. Students may also have the opportunity to participate in the general education setting, maybe during an elective class, lunch, some type of assembly, or a community-based experience. Again, they would be provided the necessary supports by our classroom staff. Inclusion opportunities are based on an individual student basis or need. Students also have the opportunities to interact with peers throughout the school building through various programs. There are programs such as Best Buddies, there's student intern programs. Some of our sites do have peer programs. There's lunch assemblies as well as corollary sports. However, this is based on specific school sites. So not all of our sites are going to have the same programs. So we want to make sure people are aware of that. In our secondary settings, starting in middle school, we do have a focus on what we call work-based learning. Some people do refer to that as maybe vocational skills, but we kind of shifted to the term of work-based learning, as well as community access and personal independence skills. And we kind of really start this in middle school. Back years ago, we really, did this in high school, but we realized we were kind of, wasting a little bit of time with this. So we kind of shifted to the middle school setting starting here. And typically in middle school, we're really focusing on those soft skills with students, really trying to teach them, sitting in our seat, increasing time on task, kind of learning, working left to right, teaching them to ask for help, all those skills to really start building up that independence. And these skills are going to start not only in middle school, but it really is going to follow them through the high school setting. And by the time we get to the high school setting, we're really, shifting and expanding and really starting to focus on those functional skills to really help build that independence. Because our goal is to prepare students for that transition to post-secondary experiences. We really want them to be as independent as possible, to be an independent young adult. You're going to see in our middle and high school settings, us implementing those lessons related, again, to the daily living, community-based instruction. We have a real big focus on communication, socialization, and that functional living. Our social skills component is supported through foundational communication and social interaction skills. And that's targeted individually through direct instruction based on individual IEP goals. And this is supported across the student's day. Again, when they're coming with us, both in small and large group settings, and that's both with adults and peers within the program. And then to end, instruction is individualized based on individual IEP goals and objectives. Again, our instructional model and supports are really drawn from evidence-based practices and autism-specific strategies that we're implementing throughout the student's day. And we're also ensuring that students are provided access to those alternate learning outcomes that are aligned with the MCPS curriculum. Again, these are adapted and modified so students are able to access them appropriately. And I am going to hand it back off to Ms. Tagliaferri to share more information about the extensions program.
Hi, thank you. Next slide, please. So our extensions program is for, students in our county that are highly impacted by their adaptive and or internalizing challenging behaviors, and thus are having difficulty accessing the curriculum and instruction in their current, I would say their previous self-contained program. So most of the students that come to us have already been through, one of the sets of services that we have already spoken about, but the IEP team has determined that they require an additional level of behavioral support. And that behavioral support looks like consists of a multidisciplinary team that includes a social worker, a behavior support teacher, and a program specialist, along with more intensive staffing in their classroom. So our extensions classrooms in the elementary and in the secondary, middle and high school, we have one teacher, we have 3 paraeducators, 5 to 7 students, and additional staffing as needed. Many of our students do have, one-to-one adult support, and we are able to provide that. These members of this team, like I said, they're working collaboratively to meet the students' academic, behavioral, and social emotional needs. And this is done through a variety of internal structures that these programs have, but also in their ongoing communication and collaboration with the families that they are supporting. The instructional setting in extensions is self-contained for all of their core content areas. While this is an extremely restrictive program and that students are not accessing their lunch and or their electives with their general education peers, it is housed at or in comprehensive schools. So our secondary extensions programs, our down county is at Odessa Shannon Middle School and Albert Einstein High School. And our up county is Lakelands Park Middle School and Quince Orchard High School. Again, the students are accessing those alternate achievement standards, and they're going to participate in whole group, small group, and individualized individual instruction. The students are also participating in that community-based instruction 2 times per week, and they are also participating in the work-based learning both in their school at their job sites and outside of the school on those off-sites. We most often are working with our students first in the building to ensure that they are able to, safely and as independently as possible, complete the tasks that are ahead of them before we take them into the greater community. The students here typically have, and this is a typical extensions, has a fairly large range. And so while I'm saying they may have an emerging communication system, it would not be unheard of for a student to have a more reliable communication system. But as we know, that behavior that they're showing is often impacted by their communication. And so that is a focus of the students when they begin initially in the program, is to really teach them that functional communication so that we are able to hopefully decrease some of those challenging behaviors and increase those behaviors that we'd like to see, like the appropriate communication, for a response. The students often have, like I said, an emerging response system. This again has a wider range than we do in the school community based in the LFI. But again, their behavior has brought them to extensions because they are not able to necessarily even access those response methods reliably. And so that is all part of the behavior intervention plan that is put in place by or for the student. Many of our students in extensions do require support in their activities of daily living. Our goal always is, by the time they're in middle and high school, that they don't need as much support with those, especially in the area of personal management. We still have students where that is something that we are actively working on. And they really, at the end of the day, they require these additional supports, to address this behavior. And the supports are put into place in a variety of ways that are all based, on that applied behavioral and analytic principles. We are really looking at the student's environment and the relationship between those behaviors and the environment, and trying, we're putting into place interventions that are going to, directly impact that function. So like the example of the functional communication training, if there's a student who is looking for access to certain items or videos, or wants a break or would like something to stop, instead of engaging in that, externalizing behavior, we're really trying to help the students by teaching them alternate response methods for that. And that is why we do have such a high staff to student ratio. Our students typically require that direct adult supervision at all times to ensure that the behavior intervention plan is able to be carried through with fidelity. And we certainly look to feed those adults and some of those supports as they get older, so that they can either return to less restrictive services or to expand their opportunities when they leave us at age 21. And I think, at this point, we're going to be looking or answering, opening it up for questions. And I'm happy to answer questions related to school community-based learning for independence or extensions.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. We now have a good amount of time for questions and answers. We've gone through quite a bit, and thanks very much to the MCPS staff for answering a lot, but there are maybe half a dozen questions that have appeared. Daria, do you want to start with reading them out?
Sure thing. So this one may take us back a little bit in the presentation, but it would be great for someone to just jump in to answer it quickly. Please restate how the day begins and ends for Autism Connection at the high school level.
So at the high school level, the students, it's a 7 or an 8 period day, depending on the site and the way that they structure. But if it's an 8 period day, the 8th period is lunch in the middle of the day. The students start and end their day in whatever falls in their schedule. So they could have an academic class first period, they could have an elective class. Typically, our students' resource classes are going to be later in the day, but that's not always, that can vary. And the same is true at the end of the day. It's whatever class falls in their schedule. It might be the resource, it could be some other class.
I think the key to remember is that they're running a typical schedule, just like all other students in the school. So it doesn't look different. What they have built into their schedule, though, is that resource period. It is a program which is predominantly serviced for students in the general education setting. So their day is going to look very much like every other high school student.
Great, thank you. Someone else asked, how is the support staff shortage being handled in connection to the programs that were addressed tonight?
So we are really working collaboratively with our school-based teams. It is one of the wonderful parts about being part of a comprehensive school that we have the principal and the other individuals in those buildings, and we are working together to make sure that our students have that adequate amount of staff to meet their IEPs, as well as keep them safe and keep them moving forward. We also are providing a lot of additional support in classrooms, and it's one of those things where it's kind of nice, where this year I have been supporting in more classrooms than I have in a while, and so I'm able to see the kids and the teachers, and it really does inform my practice as a supervisor.
Thank you. How is the reliable communication system determined? And is every student using a Chromebook to touch screen and type like non-disabled peers?
So the reliable communication method, that terminology I use is a little bit loose, but we're really looking at whether or not a student is able to consistently and accurately communicate their wants and their needs using whatever communication system works best for them, whether it's vocal verbal, whether through sign, Chromebook, or one of a device. Our students after the pandemic, they do all have Chromebooks, which was one of the nice things that came out of it. But students are using the Chromebooks for a variety of things. They're using them in their lessons, their day-to-day lessons, and some may be using them, to communicate through their written language, or others may be using them for, the reinforcement and or repetition of skills.
Thank you. The chart with the cluster special education supervisors, are we contacting the homeschool cluster or the cluster where the potential program school is located?
So you always start with your area supervisor if you have a question or you need the involvement of somebody that's at the beginning of the process where you're looking at determining appropriate services for a student, or if you have a question about the services in your home school. So that's always going to start with the area supervisor that's assigned to your school. What we call the program supervisors, they really come into play for those students who are currently receiving services within those programs or services. So for example, you heard Anne-Marie, who was just speaking, talk about extension services, school community-based learning for independence. And so if a student is currently receiving services in one of those models, then she would be the person that might be able to, she or somebody on her team might be able to be best positioned to answer those questions or to address a concern in one of those programs and services. So if a student is currently engaged in one of those services, you would want to talk to the program supervisor, but if not, then the area supervisor, which is listed on that chart, would be the point of contact.
Thank you. How does one decide diploma versus non-diploma when your kid is still so many years from graduation?
So we have a very prescriptive process for determining whether a student is appropriate to be receiving services through those alternate learning outcomes. Alternate learning outcomes, as Anne-Marie described, are going to be aligned with the curriculum. As she mentioned, there's only one curriculum, but it would involve modifications, and it could involve programming and services that might take the student off that diploma path at a certain point throughout their educational career. And that can happen in different places along the way, depending on the severity and nature of the student's disability. So there are students who travel on that path of receiving those services in grade level outcome classes. And then at some point, there's a decision where they may need to shift over. So there's a, like I said, a prescriptive process, and we use a form. We call it Appendix A because that's where, that's the title that it comes from. Excuse me 1 second. It comes from MSDE with that title. And it is a form that we're required to work through at the IEP table. And it really first talks about whether what data supports the fact that the student has a significant cognitive disability. And from there, it takes the team through a series of checkpoints and discussions to determine whether the student would be appropriate for a shift away from that grade level path and look at the alternative learning outcome path. But it's something that would be discussed in the IEP team meeting, and there is supporting documentation that the team walks through.
Thank you. Anne-Marie, I think, mentioned earlier that you all use an Appendix A to determine whether or not a student is eligible to access the alternate standards. Is it a tool that families will use at every annual review? Can you explain that process more? Or that tool, rather.
Yes. So at every annual review, the team will use that data that Mr. Lynch was just talking about to determine whether or not the student is still eligible to access those alternate standards.
And that is supposed to be completed annually for students determined eligible. That should be completed annually.
Thank you. Do all the ALO programs accommodate students with challenges with maintaining personal space or minor aggression?
I just answered that in the chat.
Sorry, I missed it.
No, it's fine. I'd say very generally, it's not uncommon to see this combination of challenges in any of our ALO programs.
Great. And thank you for that. And parents need to consent for ALO. Did you also respond to that follow-up question? Sorry if I missed it.
So I did not respond to that follow-up question yet, but I'm happy to explain that here. So yes, after a team goes through Appendix A, if a student is found eligible, there's a second piece to that called the parental consent. And so the parent is able to provide written consent for their child to access those alternate standards and alternate assessments, or they're able to, give us their written refusal.
Thank you. And here's a question that we often get on our end at xMinds. Once you move off the diploma track, is there any way to get back on track?
Yes. So that is why we do have this discussion at every annual review. We do have students who may return to the diploma track. Once, a student is in their secondary years, I will say the longer that they are accessing those alternate standards, they may be less prepared to access those credit-bearing courses that are required for high school graduation. And that is definitely a point of conversation when the team goes through that Appendix A.
But it sounds like it's a fairly straightforward process for parents advocating for their kids if that's what they would like to see. Just trying to understand if parents would experience a lot of complexity in trying to advocate for their kid on this particular issue.
Let me try my best to answer that. So it depends on what parents are advocating for. So, it is a complex issue because we're talking about making a very big decision around, a shift that would ultimately, move a student away from working towards those credit-bearing classes and that ultimate diploma. They would be working towards a certificate of completion. Which does not mean that students can't access post-secondary options, including access to college. We have some wonderful college programs out there that our students are currently engaged in that have moved on from MCPS. And so, but it is a big decision, and it would be based on a lot of data and discussion. It's typically a conversation that starts when students are young, and it's something that it could be a journey for many families in terms of ongoing collection of the data and learning how students respond to different services. So it is complicated, and it is a big decision, and we always want to make the right decision when it comes to something that important. So we take it very seriously, and there are families out there that want to wait longer before making that decision to make that shift, and we respect that and we work with them. So we try to meet parents where they are on that journey.
Thank you. We have a few more questions. Do kids have to change for PE in middle school? If so, how are students supported? And how would support be documented in the IEP so the student changes in a timely manner and doesn't get distracted, for example?
I don't think we have a PE expert here, but I will say that if there's something that specific, and we do know that there are certain, especially programs and services where we see a more likely a higher need for some students to have that type of specific recommendation on their IEP. For example, in our bridge services, many of those students are dealing with some anxiety issues around social settings. And so, PE can be a challenging setting for students who are experiencing that need. And so there are some very specific steps that they follow in terms of that process in the bridge program that Dr. Ives could clarify. But the reality is that we treat each student individually, and when there is an individual need around something like that's specific, it typically would be documented in the supplementary aids and services portion of the IEP.
Thank you. And I think we're winding down. I do see one or two more questions. One is, how is the school location determined for a particular program? Is it based on availability, need, preference, et cetera?
I can take that question. We're required to serve our students in as close to their neighborhood school as possible, if not within that neighborhood school. So for a particular autism service, for example, if a child were recommended for autism resource services, we would determine the closest ARS site to the neighborhood school. There are times, particularly in our smaller services, like our classic autism programs, where we might talk to the family about serving a student in what we would call, well, what is our next closest setting in a case of particular overcrowding or individual need. We've worked with transportation to identify alternate locations.
Thank you. And there was a follow-up question, I'm sorry, to the diploma track question for ALO student returning to high school diploma track. Can they return to high school on the diploma track with a reduced workload and modified instruction to help close the gap?
Well, I don't think reduced workload and modified instruction is going to help close the gap, but I think the answer is yes, students can return. And again, we work with students to the diploma path. What we do in some cases, and it's you know, it's difficult to discuss specifics when you're talking about very unique situations for each student. But for some students, there's a recognition that they may not be able to complete all the graduation requirements within the 4-year cohort. And so there are some, typically we would be aware of that entering into high school. And so there are some students for which we, may pace out their access to the credit bearing courses over a 5-year period. And so that is, the pacing of and how we deliver those credit bearing courses is a part of the IEP discussion and decision-making process for students.
Thank you. Someone just dropped in the chat, if you have to move to another county or state, would the student's IEP travel with them? And will the school help with transferring to a similarly suited program at the new school district?
Our goal is to write IEPs that can and will transfer clearly from state to state and district to district, although there is some variation even in the state of Maryland. It's not uncommon, especially in this area, for us to serve families who are in the Army or other jobs that take them moving places, and we certainly are responsive as possible to requests from other districts to talk about students and exchange information with parental consent.
Thank you. Is there any collaboration with the Montgomery Virtual Academy for disabled students who may have difficulty attending in person to earn a diploma?
I'm
So
sorry.
we do have students that are, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, I didn't catch the question. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Is there any collaboration with the Montgomery Virtual Academy for disabled students who may have difficulty attending in person to earn a diploma?
We do have students with disabilities in the virtual academy. And so we would work with those staff have the IEP. They would work with the family and with the teachers that they have available. Also work with the homeschool to gain as much information and knowledge about how to best deliver those services in the virtual setting. So we do have students that are working towards diploma and students working towards certificate in the virtual academy. I will say that it's my belief that for students who have a significant amount of services or service hours documented on their IEP, that they would be best served in person. We want to make sure that we're not putting up barriers to providing those services to students. I would say that the virtual setting is a better fit for some students, but that's a conversation that could be had through the IEP team discussion.
Thank you. Are community-based learning programs fully funded and the type of activity not dependent on funding availability, as is the case with the elementary school programs currently?
I don't understand the question, Anne Marie. Do you have a better sense?
Yeah. So the community-based learning activities, that 2-time-a-week instruction, is budgeted for through our instructional funds. So yes, they are funded.
Thank you. And I know you may not be.
Does that clarify that? Does that answer the question?
There's a second part to it, but I'm not sure. It's not clear for me. And the type of activity not dependent on funding availability, as is the case with the elementary school programs currently.
I think I understand the question. There are restrictions around whether or not schools and teachers can ask parents to send funds for different activities that might have in the past been accessed through community-based instruction. We've worked hard to develop community-based activities that can be funded with our existing instructional funds that have real-life applications and also have direct links to academic instruction and our instructional standards. So not all community-based activities that teachers or families might wish to participate in are funded, but we do have adequate funding to address our mandates around community instruction.
Thank you. And one last question was around, and I know you may not be able to talk specifics, but just from a general standpoint, how do these programs work with non-speakers?
Many of the students in all of the services that we discussed tonight are students who use alternative and augmentative communication. We didn't talk tonight about our Interact office and the services that they offer. Many of our speakers briefly touched on alternate communication supports, and I'm not sure that I can add anything to what our speakers have shared tonight without going into the whole world of alternative and augmentative communication, which might be a topic for another evening.
Thank you. I think that was the last question from the chat. Back over to you, Nora.
Okay, thank you, Daria. Thank you so much to all the MCPS staff who presented and who have been patiently answering all the questions. I think you've gotten a lot of information that's not always straightforward and easy to find on websites. We did put the email of the various presenters in the chat, so if you feel something wasn't clear, you could send a question on. Meanwhile, Annie has dropped into the chat a 3-question feedback form. Kindly take a few minutes to fill this out for us. We've recorded the presentation. We will mail you a link to the recording in the next few days, as well as a link to the slides. And for those of you who have children in elementary school or entering elementary school, please note that Thursday at 7, we're going to have a similar session on services for elementary school children on the autism spectrum. So once again, thank you so much for attending. And yeah, thank you, Chris, and your whole team. And I won't read off all the names, but very, very helpful and informative.
Thank you for having us. Everybody take care.
Thank you.